What is endangering the lives of Kansas moms-to-be? That's what one bill aims to find out. Plus, standing your ground. Who should be able to do it and when? Lawmakers rethinking their answers. But first, limits on remote learning causing problems for Kansas schools plagued by COVID. Is there another way? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Surprise! With delays in the move to a new building, we're back early for a short 5-week stint during the legislative session. And we've got a lot to talk about. Let's begin with the current rise in COVID-positive testing and schools closing because they can't keep enough teachers and subs to cover all the classes. This is all raising questions about the state's 40-hour remote learning limit. KAKE's Hannah Baker takes a closer look.
It affects schools across the state, and especially my kids' schools.
Wichita parent Katie Grover says she's worried about her kids' education after 6 different Wichita schools had to cancel class for a day due to COVID. And even though the district has the ability to shift to fully remote, House Bill 2134 limits how long each student and district can stay remote.
I'm frustrated that they would put these strategies in place or put these rulings in place that really hurt my kids.
And it sounds like she isn't the only one concerned.
I've been getting emails from students. They are worried about their grades because they've been out.
Newly appointed board member Kathy Bond spoke up during the Wichita Board of Education meeting Tuesday, asking if there was something the district could do since lawmakers are back in session to get the 40-hour limit per year extended during this crisis.
The legislature has put us in a really bad spot. What they did not anticipate is another surge.
The BOE president says even if the district decides to seek some kind of appeal, the odds of it getting past this legislative session could be slim.
The bottom line is school districts need to learn and are adapting.
State House Representative Christy Williams, who helped get the bill passed, says if a school is having a teacher or substitute teacher shortage or a number of students absent for illness, they have the flexibility to use the 40 hours of remote learning or close their doors completely for a day or two and make it up.
Learning is alive and well. It is available to schools. There are parameters, and if they want to exceed those parameters, then the state of Kansas will adjust their funding.
And joining us to dive into this and many other topics today, we have State Representative Stephen Owens, a Republican from Heston, and State Representative John Carmichael, a Democrat from Wichita. Thank you both so much for being here. Was this a situation lawmakers envisioned or thought ahead to when they passed this 40-hour limit? Stephen, it was your party that passed. I'm going to start with you.
Well, sure, absolutely. So I don't think that this particular situation was, right? Our goal is to keep kids in school. We know they're better off in school. And so when we contemplated this, I don't think what we took into consideration was the staffing shortage piece of this. As we know, this variant has moved through the state. It's moved through pretty much everywhere. My hope is that very soon we're going to be past this and we'll be like England that is taking all restrictions off of everything from masks to schools to vaccine mandates.
You know, my friend Steve, you all just keep thinking that by passing a law you can make COVID go away. It doesn't work that way. And of course we anticipated that this could happen. That's why I voted no on that bill, because it took away the flexibility to deal with an ever-evolving virus and pandemic. You know, once people get their shots, hopefully someday we'll get control of the virus and we won't be sitting here talking about whether it's remote learning or whether we're going to close down schools because we don't have the staff, let alone we have the sick students. But just passing a law that says that you're only going to be able to go remote for 40 hours per school year doesn't stop the virus, and now we're seeing the consequence, and that's closed schools. People were not thinking ahead when they voted for that bill.
Well, one could argue that we could just have the alternative where Chicago, they just close down schools for the rest of the semester over it, and kids are the ones that get the raw end of the deal when schools are closed.
I'll tell you something, if this virus, this pandemic, continues to escalate with a new variant, that's exactly what's going to happen, and we don't have the remote learning option because Republicans in the Kansas legislature took it away.
Okay, so I'm going to throw another question out there because I know I leave you two alone and you'll take the next half hour. I know that.
You're right.
So, We have some schools that have now had to shut down for so many days. They have one snowstorm and they're going to be going into school May, June, making up days. Is there a way, or is there a will to come up with some sort of compromise action that would give schools a little bit more flexibility than they've got right now?
I think that the conversation is always open. We've heard the ruling about SB 40 being held constitutional based on what the Supreme Court has said. They raised some concerns, and as I understand, there is a will to go back into SB 40 and to look at that. But I'm here to tell you, I would much rather see my child get the education that they need, the in-person learning that they need, and go into May and or June than I would to see them go remote, because we have seen the data and we've seen the statistics of how far that education process is diminished in what our kids learn when they do.
Well, first, SB 40 was not held constitutional by the Supreme Court. Rather, the Supreme Court said that the law as written had not been complied with by the plaintiffs and that they did not need to reach the constitutional issues, which they've reserved for another day. But what I think we may see, and we'll see whether or not Chairman Williams recognizes this, I think we may see a bill that cuts the number of certified teaching days, because I don't see a way out. We've already dug the hole so deep, and it's going to get worse next week and the week after, that I don't know how we're going to get the number of certified teaching days in this year, even if we go to June or July.
Oh, because one thing that we do need to keep in mind as we look at the pandemic numbers, there's a lot of talk about Omicron, but actually Omicron is really more of an East Coast thing. We really haven't had a whole lot of cases of Omicron here in Kansas yet. We're still dealing with the Delta wave. Oh, and Omicron is still yet to come, which means we're not close to finishing this.
I hope and I pray that Omicron is the last variant, but I'll tell you, I think the science tells us otherwise. The natural history of viruses like this is that they continue to mutate and they continue to find a way around vaccines and treatments. It's something you got to stamp it out, because if you let it continue to smolder, it will continue to catch fire.
And therein lies the rub, right? We believe that Omicron could be the beginning of the end. As a matter of fact, that the endemic is in sight. And maybe if we didn't have so many rules and so many laws and so many regulations locking us down, we would be further ahead in this process.
Where we disagree is, I hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I'm afraid my Republican colleagues continue to hope for the best and let the future go as it may. So we disagree.
And we're going to leave that there because we've got other things to talk about, gentlemen. State lawmakers are now considering changing Kansas's Stand Your Ground law in the wake of 17-year-old Cedric Lofton's death while in custody. Eli Higgins explains.
It is absolutely tragic anytime one of our youth lose their lives. Especially when they're in custody, when they're supposed to be in a safe place.
Kansas House Representative Stephen Owens is talking about the death of 17-year-old Cedric Lofton. And as the chairman of the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee, it's a tragedy that hit close to home.
It really hurts my heart when things like this occur.
District Attorney Mark Bennett announced Tuesday he would not file charges against any JIAC staff, citing the state's Stand Your Ground law because Cedric was combative and throwing punches. Owen says this law's original intent was simple: to give you the right to fight back against things like intruders in your home without a legal obligation to first try to run away.
I don't quite understand how Stand Your Ground applies in a situation where you have a young man in custody, and how that applies to, the folks working there.
Owen says he thinks it's time to revisit the law to see if anything needs to be changed to ensure it's being used for its original intent.
I certainly know that it wasn't, back in that day, this was not a thought that something like this would happen or that it would apply to a situation like that. That's for sure.
Owen says at the end of the day, nothing can undo the loss of one of our youth, but says he'll work hard to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Our hope is that we learn from this situation, that we are able to do things better in the future, and that we can make better informed decisions to avoid a situation like this ever occurring again.
And Stephen, I know that between the recording of that interview and coming on this show, you said you've had some conversations with Mark Bennett about the Stand Your Ground laws, his concerns. What did you learn?
I learned that Stand Your Ground has been interpreted so broadly over the last 10 years with so much case study that it has opened the door to nearly any single self-defense claim, even when things exceed, for example, taking a gun to a fist fight. I don't think that was the original intent of the law. I think when this passed, it passed nearly unanimously back in the legislature with the idea that you do not have an obligation to retreat, that you could stand, you could have that self-defense in play. And so as we have seen cases develop, we have seen this reach so broadly. I believe that we do, as lawmakers, have an obligation to review any and all laws. I mean, after all, a young man has died, and that requires us to look at all policies, procedures, and laws in situations like these.
John?
First, I don't want to try to judge the decision made by the district attorney. I do not have all of the facts. I have read his report in summary fashion. In fact, when I was on somebody else's air at the same time, KSN's air, I was saying, this isn't what Stand Your Ground is about, but I don't think that there's any stomach in the Kansas legislature to change it. I am really encouraged to hear my friend Steve, who's the chair of Corrections and Juvenile Justice, say, wait a minute. And so I want to encourage Steve to hold hearings on this, and let's find out not so much what happened here, but why it is that someone who's shackled, lying on the floor and subdued can end up dead based upon a Stand Your Ground law. I think we need changes to that law, and it sounds to me like Steve's in a position to get that done, and I'll help him with that process. I'm on his committee.
He is, and I also want to make it clear that we're not casting judgment on those JIAC officers either.
Agreed.
Right? We do not have the information. We do not have the data. What we have is an attorney, our district attorney, who I respect very much, and his opinion on whether charges should be filed in this situation or not.
Two quick things to remember is, first, the United States Department of Justice also has jurisdiction over these types of in-custody deaths. I do not know whether the United States Attorney is looking into this, but the local prosecutor is not necessarily the last word on in-custody deaths. The second thing was something important, but I can't remember what it was.
I do know that there is a committee being formed locally with
Yes.
leaders from the community that will be looking deeper at this, and we have to have all the information before we make any decision.
And the second thing actually was that none of this determination affects the possibilities of civil lawsuits. Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act allows families like Mr. Lofton's to retain private attorneys and seek redress through the federal courts. And I presume that the district attorney's office's opinion will not be the last word.
I believe that I know they have retained an attorney. I don't know if there will be an actual lawsuit filed in this. But Stephen, you mentioned a committee locally being formed. I know one thing that supporters and friends of the family want to see is a change to the RAP device, the law that allows the RAP device to be used. And that's separate from the Stand Your Ground.
Right.
Is that another change that you could see possibly happening?
Well, I had somebody reach out to me directly after this, before I'd even had a chance to know what had happened or the decision that was made about the RAP device. Again, do we need to look at it? Certainly. We have an obligation to review all laws. Does that mean that anything needs to change? Not necessarily. There's no guarantee until we have all of the information presented in front of us, but we do have an obligation to look at it.
The RAP device is a modern-day straitjacket. It's a more humane way and probably a safer way to deal with extremely out-of-control people. I presume if there is a civil lawsuit that the manufacturer of that device, their conduct and their design might also be a subject of the inquiry. It's hard to control people who are out of control.
All right, we're going to leave that there and move on, even though this is a case that is going to continue to spawn questions and I think legislation for some time to come yet. Well, the state is letting Kansans die in childbirth when it could save them. That's what advocates like the Wichita Birth Justice Society say, and why they're asking lawmakers to change the state's maternal death review process. They took their case to the State House this week for a hearing on the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee.
Remember going to the bathroom, and there was nothing but blood. And I was just like, okay, something's really wrong.
Rita Williams-Thompson and Sapphire Garcia-Lease have both shared their stories of loss and near loss with us, saying if only doctors had listened to them.
I raised my concerns with my doctor, and unfortunately he gave me bad information and sent me home. It changes your life forever, irreversibly, in all sorts of awful ways.
Now they're hoping state lawmakers will listen to their stories and help save lives.
I stand before you today alive and able to tell my story. But for too many Kansans, Mom didn't get to come home.
They're asking lawmakers to add pregnancy complications and near-death experiences to the childbirth-related deaths a state commission reviews every year.
We cannot assure that women survive if we don't thoroughly examine the deaths. We must know the causes of these deaths.
As well as put at least one minority member on that board, in part because in the United States, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. And that difference is about more than money.
Black women from the wealthiest communities still have babies of a lower birth weight than white women from the poorest communities. Our disparities today for Black women is worse than they were 15 years before the end of slavery.
The information these changes would lead to could then be used to change how doctors and nurses work with pregnant women.
I recall clear as day the voice of an attending nurse as I laid on that table, the scene hidden from me by that blue screen. She's bleeding.
Giving all women the extra attention they need when things go wrong to save their lives, like the attention Stacey Knoll says she got. And one thing we know is that nationally, studies show 60% of maternal deaths are preventable. A state study that just came out about a year ago now showed that 92% of maternal deaths in Kansas between 2016 and 2018 had missed at least one chance to save the mother's life. The whole point of this bill, according to the supporters, is to change that. The question is, can it make it through the system? John, I'll start with you.
I'm not on the relevant committees, and I haven't heard the testimony, but before I came to the legislature, I probably spent 15 or 20 years defending doctors and hospitals in these types of cases, and on occasion representing families who had lost loved ones. The part of the problem is a lack of overall medical resources in particularly western Kansas and southeast Kansas. You can't make a living as an obstetrician in Elkhart. That's just the bottom line. And so we don't have many of them there. We tried to train family practice physicians to have basic obstetric training, the ability to distinguish between a problem pregnancy and a normal pregnancy. But the bottom line is we haven't expanded Medicaid. We have hospitals that are closing. We have specialty care specialists, whether it's in obstetrics, neurology, or whatever you want to call it, that aren't getting paid. And accordingly, they go to other states where their bills will get paid through an expanded Medicaid system. And that's a big part of this. When we see African American rates that are high, it's also a reflection of socioeconomic differences, i.e. poverty. So it's a big problem.
I'm going to stop you there because one of the things the researcher from KU said was that the disparity, the racial disparity exists despite equalization for poverty levels. That babies born to Black women in high economic areas and high economic families still have a less chance of surviving than those born to white women in the poorest of areas. And they're saying one of the reasons that they want to do this bill is to gather information because they just don't know what the cause is.
We absolutely need the data.
Data is not gathered.
And as I say, I'm not on the committee, so I appreciate you educating me about more of these facts.
It is great, and what I will say is my daughter stands to make me a grandpa in May. And I can understand that we need this information, we need to study that. And so I look forward to hearing more about this to make an educated decision, but on its surface, absolutely more information is better.
Yeah, and there is an identical bill in the House, so you guys may be hearing it sooner rather than later. And one thing I did want to put out there when I was listening to this committee and as I've talked with the folks behind the bill is that while the idea was spurred by the racial disparities, they fully believe that by having more information, it helps all Kansas women, no matter what the race.
The other thing is just because there is a chance to solve a pregnancy at one moment in a pregnancy doesn't necessarily mean that the doctor was careless or negligent or that the mom was irresponsible. Medical conditions are subject to the will of God or the Almighty sometimes. And even though in retrospect you could say, gosh, if only we had done this, it doesn't always work that way.
I might throw in there that the idea that expanded Medicaid is going to solve this problem certainly isn't the case either.
Okay, and that is a debate for a different day. I was waiting for that to come up.
Yeah, I threw that bait out there and he finally struck.
All right, moving on to another Republican-Democratic fight. The fight over redistricting. It's on for real now as lawmakers get their first look at proposed new maps to determine which U.S. congressman or woman you'll be voting for later this year. Let's go to Rebecca Chung with the KSN Capitol Bureau for an early look.
Those maps that were introduced here seem to vary. Right now, one concern is whether two of the most populated counties in the Kansas City metro area will remain intact. This is what really could decide whether the state's only Democratic representative, Sharice Davids, will keep her seat or whether Republicans will be the only party representing the state in Congress. New lines are being drawn with several maps on the table. In the House, two maps are almost identical, one from the League of Women Voters and the other from a Democratic representative from Kansas City. Both would keep two key districts together with the odds of securing re-election for the only Kansas Democrat in Congress. Sharice Davids representing the Kansas City area, which leans blue.
We heard that. We don't want to see Wyandotte County in the 1st Congressional District. Wyandotte and Johnson counties should be kept together as close as possible by population.
Now that Davids' district has too many people in it, there are concerns of gerrymandering, Republicans having an incentive to set new lines and hurt Davids politically. One Republican-drawn map references lines drawn in 2012 when the Supreme Court decided how to draw the lines after lawmakers ran into roadblocks making a final decision. The map separates Johnson and Wyandotte County. Another map introduced by Republicans takes out the northern half of Wyandotte County.
Just all kinds of stuff that came into it and just thinking about it and knowing what are our rules and that we have to follow. A lot of it's population driven too. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Now this week, lawmakers will be meeting again to start hearings on some of those final proposals. They do have a deadline to approve a map before the end of session, but in the end, the Supreme Court will have to sign off on those final maps. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And we know that later in the week we had a fight in the Senate over a different version of the map that would have split not just Wyandotte County, but also would have split the Native American nations into different congressional districts. And they changed one part, keeping the Native American nations together, but left Wyandotte, I believe, split off from Johnson County. And there are already threats, of course, of lawsuits over that would throw it back into the court system. That 2nd district area seems to be the sticking point.
Yeah, regardless of whether this is these are maps drawn by Republicans or maps drawn by Democrats, it's going to be challenged in court. We recognize that. The reality is Johnson County and Wyandotte County have grown so much that they have to be split one way or another.
John, do you agree?
I disagree that they have to be split. And I think the map that we see from Representative Croft is drawn by the Republican National Campaign Committee. And we've got a long way to go on this issue.
Yeah, and we've been talking about it for a long time, so we're going to leave that one there and get on to one other issue that really has a lot of lawmakers upset. The Kansas Commerce Department wants to bring a $4 billion mega project to the state, but won't tell lawmakers who the company is. This is all part of a fight over whether lawmakers should create a new property sales and income tax incentive program. It's called the Attracting Powerful Economic Expansion Act, and the Kansas Reflector reports it would deliver tax incentives to existing or new Kansas-based suppliers if they conduct more than $10 million in annual sales with a specific type of manufacturing giant. The Deputy Secretary of Commerce for Business Development, Paul Hughes, told lawmakers this week the new law would need to be in effect by the end of January. That's because Kansas is one of 2 finalists for a massive advanced manufacturing facility capable of creating 4,000 permanent jobs and bringing more than $2.5 billion into the state every year. But the company, which Hughes would not name, plans to make a site selection decision in February with an announcement in March. No company name, no idea as to where in the state they're looking. A lot of unknowns here for a lot of money. Where do lawmakers stand at this point?
I'll tell you what.
John, go ahead.
I'm a Democrat, okay? I didn't like it when Sam Brownback's Labor Department did the same kind of backroom deals. I don't like it when Dave Toland is trying to sell us a bill of goods without knowing the who, what, where, and when. And as a general proposition, I don't like the concept that the state of Kansas ought to pick certain businesses and subsidize them, arguably at the expense of others. This is not good.
You know, I hate business incentives altogether. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have any. We wouldn't have to compete with others around us for the biggest handout to recruit businesses. However, we are looking at a 3 million square foot facility. We're looking at 4,000 potential jobs. And sadly enough, we do have to be competitive. Now, I don't know that we get there on this. I don't like this idea that we don't know who they are. We don't know what type of business they're going to be. We don't know what they're going to offer to our state. We've got to have more information somehow to make an informed decision.
An example of this is something my friend Steve offered last year, the boys and girls from Beneficent, and a novel funding program that he pushed the bill through. I didn't vote for it. We're now having problems with getting the information about these investors.
That's absolutely incorrect.
And there's more coming.
Zero state incentives. Zero taxpayer money.
I'm talking about giving an exclusive contractor ability to your friends. Watch the Kansas City Star. Things are coming.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait and see what that may be. Meanwhile, you did mention, you know, some big numbers here and the state needing to be competitive. The Department of Commerce said that over the last few years, the state has missed out on, was it 10 or 11 similar type deals because of a lack of these incentives. Is this the Missouri-Kansas border war writ large?
Sure.
That's a great question. I mean, again, states that offer economic incentives for a long-term draw on employee growth. I mean, I understand it. I hate it, but I understand it, because to be competitive in a competitive market, we have got to be willing to compete.
The process allows winners and losers to be chosen based upon how many palms they can grease in the legislature. And that's not the way to make business decisions. And the concept of making these decisions behind closed doors with legislators having to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to participate in the hearing, that's not the way open government works.
And I would agree, but it appears from my good friend from Sedgwick County's perspective, we would just as soon not see any growth in Kansas than we would to pass legislation to help them out.
I want to see growth the old-fashioned.
That slim moment of agreement, I'm not liking incentives, is now long gone.
And we're about out of time.
And we are out of time.
No, we want to see investment, private investment in Kansas, not government
Okay, John, we're going to leave that there.
My good friends from
Thank you
Beneficent have done.
both so much for joining me this week. You guys always make it so much fun when you're on. Thanks again also to all of you. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, the Wichita Eagle, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue the conversation with you online. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For now, stay safe and have a great week.